So we have Ram from Rangde, again a veteran, 14 years experience. I'll let him talk about the platform. We have Mayura from Craftizen, again a passionate entrepreneur, been in this space from very early stages and grown it. I'll again let her talk about her NGO and her business efforts. And then we have Aatish, who's also again a very passionate entrepreneur. I think him and his wife have been working with clusters in Maharashtra. So I'll allow them first a couple of minutes to introduce themselves, talk about their platforms, and then we'll get into the topic of discussion. I hope that works for everybody. Awesome. Ram, why don't you start?
Thank you, Sujay. So Ramdi is a peer-to-peer lending platform, well, at a very high level. We started in 2008, and then we pivoted in 2019 because the RBI came out with this revolutionary regulation, which allowed any Indian to lend money to a fellow Indian. And RBI said if one were to do that, then the person who is borrowing, RBI would give it the same status as though the person is borrowing from a bank. In other words, the person who is borrowing would get a credit score in all the four credit bureaus in India. So we struggled a bit to file for the license because we had a funding challenge as well, where we said, how do we find mission aligned capital in the form of equity to be able to set this new entity up? So we were very fortunate to find a lot of individuals who came forward. So that's what we do. We are sector agnostic and we work across the country. We've done very small inroads. We've done about 2 crores of capital so far in this new entity, but we have a massive plan going ahead. So yeah, that's it for now. Thank you.
Hi everyone. So I founded Craftizen about 9 years back, and at that time the idea was simple: to bridge the gap between the craft sector and the corporate sector. Because there were so many opportunities. The new Companies Act had just come out with the CSR guidelines, and therefore there were opportunities to get funding. And I really look at CSR funding as good capital, because it's very supportive capital, right? So to get CSR funding into the craft sector, but also to look at it as a market for corporate gifting, merchandise, workshops, employee engagement activities, all of that. So that's exactly what we've done. Our initial focus was to work with traditional artisans, but we evolved because another thing of working with donors is you also need to be doing things at scale. And where we did find scale was working with unskilled communities. So women in urban, rural, tribal areas, women rehabilitated from trafficking, domestic violence, even women at Bangalore Central Prison. Also, adults with intellectual disability. So, those with autism, Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, mental illness, mental health, you name it. So, what we've done is we've customized skills to suit ability of these different profiles of beneficiaries across various geographies as well. And I'll talk about some of our collaborative model and how that has helped us in this whole bridging the capital gap. So yeah, and when it comes to traditional crafts, we are primarily focusing on Channapatna and Cherial and Banaras, 3 clusters.
Thank you. Myself, Aatish Chavan. I am from Kolhapur. Kolhapur is a basic hub of, you can say, 20,000 artisans and having almost 10 craft clusters. So at the start, we focused on all the craft clusters, you can say. But slowly, when you talk about craft clusters, it's initially about community development. So when we started the community development, then we came to know that since we are not from this designer background, designer fraternity, we are engineers. So then we came to know that the community development is not that easy. So instead of focusing on 10 clusters, we then focused on 4 clusters. So major 4 clusters are Kolhapur Chappals, as it's that's a global say brand, Kolhapur Chappals. So that is your first cluster, Kolhapur Chappals. Then Kolhapuri jewelry, Kolhapuri terracotta handicrafts, and handmade baskets. So these are the 4 clusters we are focused on. We started Kalapuri in 2017. So in 6 years, we have developed these 4 communities, we have developed these 4 craft, and right now we are into selling all these 4 say products at global level through all sales channels, B2C, B2B, D2C as well. And yes, so this journey so far is like ups and downs, but yeah, we love this journey. Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Am I clear enough without the mic? Then we don't have to go back and forth. Okay, awesome. So Aatish,
Yeah.
we were talking. I'll start with you. We were talking a little earlier, and we were talking about how you financed yourself to the scale at which you are right now. Correct. So I would love to understand a little more. And if you can share your story with everybody on, what were the three stages of financing that you went through when you started this? So I know that you started with self, but then can you talk us through the three phases and the three kinds of funding or financing that you had to raise and what stages or what steps you took for it?
Yeah, sure. So it was way back in 2009. So we started with a small business or a small boutique. So since being an engineer, like we have that idea, like we have to do something new, something different. So then the second journey started, like let us do the own manufacturing of the garments. And then we have been to Jaipur and all. So once we have been to Jaipur, like everyone knows, Jaipur is hub of say artisans and handicrafts and everything. So when we returned to Kolhapur, then we came to know that handicraft is altogether different and Kolhapur is also famous. So in 2015, we started with the trading of handicrafts. So that was the second, you can say, business journey altogether, which was very different for us. So when we started to know more in depth of this total handicrafts, then we understood the different communities, then different crafts, and then we started this handicraft journey altogether. So initially, it was all about say since I was working as a professor, it was a kind of a government job, so salary was very good. Six pay, I guess you all know six pay and all. So six pay was having a very good salary. So all that salary we used to do the capacity building, trust awareness program, everything. Every day me and wife, we used to visit the artisans' homes, doing the capacity building, getting them from home to the mandir at least, which was a totally difficult task. So that was the first phase where my salary, then personal loans, sometimes gold loans, sometimes sell that gold as well. We did everything to get this community strong and have a trust between us. So that was the first phase. Second phase, like in 2017-18, we started since I was working in engineering college, so the NAC committees, NBS, and all. I was very good in writing proposal. So I started writing proposals like a DPR to almost three ministries: Ministry of Textiles, Ministry of say MSME, then NABARD. So all these three, I wrote three different proposals, three different craft, chappal, jewelry, and the terracotta. And all this, you can say DPRs got sanctioned. And with the help of this, I got these government grants. And with the help of these government grants, we build the CFCs. Now, CFCs, like everyone know, these CFCs are meant for you can say common facilitation center or community, and that we did for all the three communities. With the help of this, we got well acquainted with all the you can say government grants. And the third one is like since we have already did this or rather we came so much far, then there were many CSRs which also approached us. And with the help of this CSR, again we did some upskilling workshops. We got working capital through this CSS. And yes, so all these three phases taught us that in craft sector you need cash flow, and you never know like when you're going to need that cash flow. So cash flow should be always positive. This is the first ever and foremost requirement. And in this all 6 years, like we believe in a triple P model, like passion, patience, and perseverance. So these are the three P models that we follow. And in this journey, yeah, we came to know about these three P. Once you have these three P, everything is going to come. Yeah,
Once you have
thank
these
you.
three P, you will get the fourth P, that's profit.
Profit. Very nice.
Mayura, will move to you next. So you spoke about how you created collaborations, how you got a collective in place. Correct? You also worked initially with artisans. So I think let's say Aatish's focus is artisan clusters, but then you expanded that. So you were into reskilling, you were into upskilling, you were into bringing in more scale, correct, and bringing in more people so that they can earn more also. So can you talk to us about the kind of funding you had, how you financed it, and how the collaborations were helpful?
Yeah. So, I actually started my development sector career with a funder with UNDP, right? So now that's a very different journey, right? You have to spend money. In fact, we used to have quarterly spending targets. If you don't spend the funds, then you're hauled up. Yeah, seriously. But one thing I learned about being with a funder is to think at scale, right? Because you have to work with multiple partners, implementing partners. And obviously, you're not doing like we were doing a pilot program in rural tourism, and the pilot program had 36 villages, right? And of course, then it scaled all of that. But when I started Craftizen, what I realized from that experience is there is a big gap between the funder, right, and the implementing agency, right? It's not just enough to give funds. You have to do a lot of capacity building of the organizations themselves. A lot of NGOs don't come with founders or, those with management backgrounds, any, knowledge of finance, technology, all of that, right? There's a lot of hand holding. And who's going to play that role, right? And I felt maybe that's the gap that Craftizen can play. So we get funding, but we do the implementation with existing organizations. So A, we're not reinventing the wheel, because building trust with the community starting from scratch takes a very long time, right? And if you're going to go down that path, then you're really, going to scale very slowly. Each community can take 3-4 years. Whereas off the bat, I wanted to work with, like our first proposal was 3 locations, and some 15 partners. And the way we did that is we said, okay, what is the role each, entity will play? So we had to figure out. So, I'll take one example. So, our first project was working with adults with intellectual disability and also mothers of those adults. So these are unskilled women. So we said, okay, what is it that can be done for this particular group? So we studied their profile and said, okay, there's only 4 hours a day, 4 to 5 hours that they're at the daycare center, but only 2 hours can be used for something productive. Limited fine motor skills. Therefore, it has to be a simple enough skill, but the output has to be of the scale and quality and finishing that is marketable, not for charity, but purely for a good quality product. So considering all of that, we also did a lot of research, traveled around the country, and said, okay, flowers are therapeutic to work with for this profile. There were organizations doing holy colors, rangoli, etc., but none in South India. So we were the first to start in South India. Then over time, we've also innovated. We came up with a new material called flow dust. In fact, most of your bags have a tag, a green tag that's made from flow dust, which is a mixture of flour and paper. And that was, again, like I said, a new material we created. And again, paper is therapeutic, right? But the best part is flour and paper are discards as well. So it's also environmentally friendly. And thanks to Accenture, our first donor, we named this the Green Skilling Program. And that now has scaled to 5 cities and continuing to scale, because in this sector of working with adults with ID, intellectual disability, not many had done what we've done, which is to come up with IP, like we've come up with innovation in crafts that is also therapeutic, that is scalable, that can be done across the country. And therefore, it is IP, in the sense a lot of design IP has gone into it, but it's open source. We're sharing it freely, right? So this is one way we've scaled, by being collaborative, but being very, very hyper focused on design and innovation. I mean, there were times when I would have 2 designers and 1 program manager, because we said because we didn't have to manage the day-to-day operations, right? There was a team, but they won't be able to do what we did or scale or do any impact actually if there was no saleable product. And that comes down to design and innovation and constant. You can't say, okay, we've done holy colors 1 year and next year we'll coast on that. No, because next year there are 10 competitors who've come up. Anybody sees an opportunity, obviously, which is good. And there are low or zero barriers of entry in the craft sector, right? So you constantly have to be on your toes.
Got it. So what are your sources of funding for these? You mentioned Accenture as a donor.
Yeah.
But so what were your other sources of funding? So, sticking to the topic of financing,
Yeah.
how were you able to finance this continuous, development that you need to do and invest in R&D and invest in creating, new categories in the
Right.
craft sector?
So CSR mainly, a few innovation competitions, foundations, things like that, HNIs, friends and family, all of that, but largely CSR funding.
Largely CSR.
Yeah, I mean, there's honestly, I think, a huge, huge gap in terms of, I think, how that capital is, sort of, actually spend, because there's limited capacity everywhere, right? Funders are looking for really good partners, right? Partners are looking for funders where there is an alignment, but that whole conversation and process takes so long, right? So I do think there is a gap. I don't know what we can do, like a, it's like a speed dating sort of thing. If we can do that next time, and literally have a lot of CSR reps and have a lot of us from the CMH space, but that might be interesting, because a lot of times, right, it has been very serendipitous. Literally, I've been at a conference, been introduced to somebody and said, hey, they're looking for somebody, and that's how the conversation started. So serendipitous, which is surprising, because I feel like I do a decent enough job of networking and putting myself out there, but yet it is, I mean, I still haven't cracked, what is this science of, getting a donor on board. So that is something, to think about for our next. I think the speed dating we should definitely do.
Yeah, so I think that will lead very well to Ram, who's on the other side. So I think that's again the story that I wanted to bring out. And I think, while we talk about the topic of, let's say, artisans and lenders and stories on both sides, what also came out, and unfortunately we couldn't have the other artisan who was supposed to be with us on the panel, because he had an unfortunate death in his family. But the artisan perspective there is how difficult it is for them as individual artisans to do everything that Aatish and you have called out. Correct? You imagine they're great at their craft, they're great at their skill, but everything it takes from that skill to convert it to a business, right? Or to write proposals, to do networking, to do innovation, to talk to more people, to understand what investors want. It's not so easy for an artisan to do, right? And that's their perspective. They are still dealing with existential questions. How will I survive? Where will my, roti kapda makan come from? Yes, I have a skill, but that's not very monetizable. Whom can I rely on? Correct? So I think those are sort of issues they have, and we have seen how people like Aatish and Mayura, or their organizations play a very important catalyst kind of a role in ensuring that artisans are getting this funding, which is available but is separate. So I think let's move to Ram now and talk about. So Ram, you are doing peer-to-peer. You have invested in individual artisans. You invested in organizations. So how do you see yourself, you know, debating or discussing internally when you have to make a funding decision? Correct? How do you do that? And what are the sort of questions that run in your mind? Let's start with that, and then I'll talk about the opportunity that you see by doing this funding.
Sure. So I think we're very unique in the sense that we're regulated by a very unique regulation of RBI called the NBFC P2P. So many of us may not know this, but this is unique in the sense that we're not allowed to lend from our books, in the sense that we can't lend our own money. So that is very liberating, because then we don't have to borrow money from a bank or another financial institution. And we don't also have to meet all the capital adequacy ratios which a traditional lender like a bank or an NBFC have to meet. So it's a big, in that sense, a big revolutionary model. So what we have done is from day one, in fact, when we started way back in 2008, while we were incubating the idea, while we were in Oxford, I think the idea was very clear, right? So a large population in India, in fact, all of us in this room are in the minority. We are the people who are included financially. Just to give you the latest number, post-pandemic numbers, only 12.8% of India's eligible population, 15 years and above, have access to credit from formal sources. Right? This is a very, a very painful statistic, right? Because a large population, in fact, the majority of India doesn't have access to formal credit. And they're also self-employed. That's because it's not as though all the credit card companies would give them credit cards. So how do we serve them, right? So that was the whole thought process. And when we looked at it a bit deeper, we also noticed there were two problems with this whole access to credit piece. One, the cost, but also the choice, and which all of us, by the way, take it for granted. And what I mean by the choice is that their ability to choose how much, when, for how long, and on what terms they want to borrow. When you combine low cost of capital with choice architecture, it becomes a game changer. They will not even notice that they actually took a loan, because now the credit program or the loan which they've taken is actually designed based on the unique cash flows. It could be a term loan, it could be a very customized credit. So that is something which is really what, and so that's how it all started. That was the why we started Rangde, right? So that was the why, and that why resonated really well with the communities. We actually don't do any marketing per se, right? Because and that validation was not only at the communities who are borrowing, but that validation came from the communities who are also lending, who are people like us, who are all like us, all of us in this room, right? Because they saw a lot of value in that, saying that yeah, this makes sense, right? Because in a country like India, where we don't have social security, and the least all of us could do is give somebody credit so that they can actually stand on their own feet and move up the value chain. So that was the hypothesis. So it's been 15 years and counting. We went through a lot of ups and downs, but I think that was what kept us going, and that's why we've come this far.
Okay, so
Yeah.
so as a founder, do you have a specific list of questions or numbers that you look for, while evaluating whether to fund or not? Because that is always a question.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So let me answer your question now. So, because we are so unconventional, we also have a very unconventional underwriting model. And so we look at all these standard parameters, but one thing which has an overarching influence on all the other parameters is how much social capital our partners enjoy with the communities they are working with. Okay, I'll tell you first the model. So model, we don't directly work with communities because it's inherently not scalable, also not accessible because of the digital platform we have. So what we do is we work with community organizations. They could be for-profit, they could be non-profit, they could have any legal structure, who in turn work with community or artisans or producer groups. So we look for this organization's social capital with the communities they work. Now it's a little bit, it's a little bit, but it's something which you can feel and which you can also, we're putting a structure around it. We're trying to put some little bit of AI into it and all of that to see if we can bring out some patterns there. But it's very tangible though, right? So that is something.
It could be something like an NPS score, if I can call it that.
Yeah.
Something to that extent. You may have to come up with your social
parameters,
capital metric,
Yeah.
but it may be something similar to an NPS score.
Absolutely,
Fair
absolutely.
enough. Awesome. So that's great to know. Now the other part of that, Ram, is you mentioned earlier that there was a metric where you said you had 0% NPA, right? Non-performing assets. You had 0 people who did not return the money or didn't give
For
returns.
artisans.
Artisans, right? So we'd love to know that because in the VC world or in the traditional funding world, correct? It is a risk versus return ratio, right? And we have been hearing even in all other discussions, throughout the day, where they talk about this may not be high risk or high return, but it's sustained return, right? And so like even Nitin was calling out earlier in the day, while as an investment, even for a personal level, you have a diversified portfolio. This is a very good investment channel for a sustained, investment. So what do you think of that?
I think the problem is that the problem lies somewhere else. See, this 12.8% where we all belong, it's a sizable market. Right? So many of the financial institutions are very happy chasing that market, competing with others because that's where the money is. Right? So there is no motivation for them to come out of their comfort zone.
Right.
That's the real challenge. Right? So and therefore when they come out of the comfort zone, they need to also come up with new constructs like if you look at the, I don't want to name the banks or any, but if you look at the top financial institutions, they struggle to even think of saying that, okay, small and marginal farmers, no, too risky. When we can still meet our financial targets, we can still create shareholder wealth by not serving small and marginal farmers, we will not do that. So, so that's the larger problem. Even if they do, it will be tokenism. Right? They may just do a one or two programs, get some, brownie points, but it won't go beyond that.
Got it. So the last question I have around for you is, so how do you size this market? Do you have any sizing done? Do you think that this is a 100 crore investment opportunity for you, or do you think this is a 500 crore opportunity for you? Is there any way in which you have sized up the market?
Okay, so,
Opportunity, yeah.
by the way, we are entirely bootstrapped. We are a for-profit ourselves, and we have 150 individuals on our cap table, which is a record in itself. So, like, before we size the market, I think we're looking at sizing ourselves first to see that, we need to survive, we need to take care of ourselves, well-being, and all of that. So, because what we're really paranoid about is that we want to build an institution which can outlive us. Right? It will take some time, but it will. But with very strong unit economics, with a very strong differentiated value proposition for all the stakeholders. So therefore we're not in that, saying that if there's 100 crore. I mean, clearly, I'm sure there's a big market out there, and we are looking at scaling this organically at this point in time because
What is the average size of debt or funding that you give?
Okay, so it's because of the choice architecture, we let the communities choose. We're super flexible. It could be a term loan. It could be any amount. Um, yeah, so and that's where I think it's very powerful as a construct because the communities get to decide for themselves, and they're also very well aware where the money is coming from. So they know exactly that these are individuals or well-meaning individuals who really care about what they're doing.
Awesome. So I think so. We've got three very different perspectives. Somebody who's sort of done the bunch of things, worked with a very specific cluster, and done very focused kind of things. We've spoken to Mayura and understood how she's expanded, collaborated, and then we've talked about funding. So I think we might just flip over to the audience and see if there are any questions at this point that we can take, and then I'll come back with some more questions if we have time. But I think I'd like to throw it open to the audience. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so there's one question, maybe Ram, you could take that. So there are 200 million artisans, the number was quoted in the morning today, and many of them will never visit an India International Exhibition Center. They may not speak English, they may not be educated. So in order to solve their problems for seed funding, what are the options and avenues available in the country? And are these only lending options? And I mean, there's a discoverability problem for those options. I just want you to kind of elaborate on that.
Yeah, I think, so we do debt. We do only debt, working capital. We do all kinds of, debt instruments. So I think that's a larger, bigger problem we have, right? Where, the artisans at large, they don't have agency, right? So that they can actually go and represent themselves. That problem is a much more deeper problem. Um, so yeah, so we do debt at all kinds of debt, short term, long term, all kinds of debt. So that's So I think.
And that was part of the question.
Yeah.
The bigger question was, so what are the avenues for them to access funds of whatever kind? Because there's a problem of discovering the avenues, and I mean, if I don't know what those avenues are, I'm sure it's not that easy.
Sadly, I don't think there are too many avenues out there, right? Because it's very limited even for social enterprises, for like ourselves, right? It's a very, very in short supply because um, it's because I think the sector has not seen its full potential, and therefore it's not mainstream yet for people to, for example, the sizing the market, all these terms, right? TAM, what is the total addressable market, and so on and so forth. So we are not there yet. So therefore, there's not a lot of interest per se to say that no, we want to do something.
Yeah, and I think one way to answer that is also that's exactly the discussion, right? Is artisans find it very difficult to get this access. So while there are grants, there are industry bodies, there is CSR, correct? All the top companies have it. It's extremely difficult for these guys to directly reach, and I think that's the role. Let's say Mayura, Aatish, and Ramdev play. Correct. So on the peer-to-peer platform, you have individuals like us who can, who are passionate, who understand the space and are willing to lend, but they underwrite the risk as a platform. And over there, you believe in the organizations and then you lend because they are then talking to you about the impact they are creating. Where let's say Mayura is saying, okay, these are 300 lives that we have changed. This is their livelihood. This is their earnings over the year. And Aatish will talk about the cluster and now they're so much of sales. So I think that's where the gap that exists between that core artisan skill and what it takes to convert it to a business is so large that we need players like them to fill that gap because like you said correctly, you and I also don't have this information. It's so disseparate, it's so wide, but there is a lot. I think again in the first session of the day, Neelam did speak about it and said there is a lot of money, correct? They also don't know where to give it, right? And like Mayura is saying, they also have goals. Even if a VC fund has raised money, they need to deploy. So your funding winter is 3 months, 6 months. That's it. Because end of the day, they have a 6, 7 year shelf life. They need to deploy the capital. So that matchmaking is a challenge, and we are hoping that these platforms and organizations are becoming the catalyst. If that answers the question.
Got it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So just to add to that, right? So you're not just pitching, the need. You're also pitching the whole story, right? And then the reach and the impact and all of that.
And
And
the
that's
product
really
innovation.
difficult for individual artisans. But the other thing I want to tell you is that, we work with both NGOs and, master artisans. Our NGO partners are fairly inept when it comes to business and management, because that's not the goal with which they've started their organization. Our master artisans, however, are really smart. They understand business naturally. They've been doing this for a long time. They understand what it takes, and they understand the value of money. And they are not obsessed with scale. We are. For them, if they can work with the cluster that they have with, one master artisan supporting 10 artisans, that's good enough, right? This obsession with scale and wanting all of that is, I think, our need. And all the lenders and financiers and everybody wants scale. That's not what the artisan wants, but it's an unviable economic unit, therefore, for financing. So that's the gap that we try and fill by saying, okay, can we combine a bunch of them, and scale and therefore, address this. But having said that, it's really still very challenging, to get the right funding for, when you need it, for the, cluster, all of that. And not all of the funding may result in, an actual tangible difference. Sometimes, you're experimenting, you're evolving, you don't know, right? Is this the right equipment that we need to upgrade with? Sometimes you might need to experiment, but there aren't enough sort of places for that. You don't have any educational institutions where you can experiment and learn, right? Like an engineering college having like a design lab, for example, where you can just experiment. That would be interesting. But there is nothing like that. So it's a lot of, trying to make the money work as soon as it's deployed, which is very difficult. So how do you do that, right? That's what at least we grapple with. Yeah.
Okay, you are.
So my question is to a lot of artisans today have artisan cards because I think that the DC handloom and handicraft offices are fairly, aggressive in their reach to artisans. Now, in your experience, how has the experience been dealing with artisans that have the card and those that don't have the card? Because it talks about both sides of the story, and I just want to know what's in
So, as I told you earlier, that Kolhapur is a hub of 20,000 artisans. So, last 6, 7 years, we have two can say heads who are dedicated for only artisan welfare. So, these two guys are working from last 6 years, and till date, out of 20,000, we have registered 2,000 artisans. So, when I say 2,000 are registered, we have got them artisan card, we have got them PAN card, we have made them digital. That means all the Jan Dhan Yojana, all these things. Then we have got that like insurance and all the things. What your facilities, whether it's a state or central, all these facilities we try to give to these artisans because without these cards, they are not going to get these facilities. So that's the first thing that we make all the artisans registered with us in all aspects and make sure that all the benefits are transferred from government to these artisans. So this is the first. Second thing is talking about the HSC center, that is handicraft service centers. Yes, they are not that aggressive, that's for sure, because at the end it's all about their job. They get paid well, so and it's all about field work. Artisans are not going to come to the HSC. Rather, HSC needs to go to the artisans, and artisans are sitting at the villages. So last 6-7 years, we have connected almost 50 villages in and around Kolhapur and got these 2,000 artisans on board. And these 2,000 artisans we have directly transferred from our organization to the HSC. And by doing so, all the benefits apart from this Yojana and all, whether it's like going to Delhi Haat, going to central exhibitions, all these facilities we try to give to these artisans. So this is what we are doing.
But they're still working with you.
No, 2,000 are registered with us. All the facilities that we are giving. So right now, if we talk about say empowerment, we are giving empowerment to close to 400. We attending there. So right now we are in this scaling phase, and definitely in coming 3 years, we are trying to empower 2,000 artists. So this is our vision.
I have a question to Mayura. Mayura, you've been working in this space of bridging the gap between the finance needs and the needs of the artisans. What would be your thought on the behavioral challenge that you face, that once you have gotten the funding, how do you ensure that the funding is rightly used, and behavioral challenge meaning the behaviors of the artisans, and how have you tackled it?
Yeah, good question. I'll take an example of a traditional cluster, Chennapatna. So last year, I mean, there are several. If any of you've been to Chennapatna, there's a large craft park where the government is actually allocating space. But that's it. You get a bare shell, and you have to sort of put in the investment. So we've been working with one group there for a while, and so we decided to set up a design innovation lab there, and to basically fund all the machinery and equipment, right? So when we initially started and sat down with the diagnostic, this emerged as the biggest challenge, right? We don't have the equipment, we can't take on new orders. Therefore, what's happening is they end up taking a lot of inefficient orders just to, make sure the artisans have work. Whereas what this lab will do is say, okay, if we can crack these large buyer inquiries, right, by dedicating these artisans there, then we only take those with certain MOQs, and we're not taking these small inefficient orders, right? Great. Did that, got the machinery sorted, did some fabulous design intervention techniques, etc. Now there aren't enough artisans. Because unfortunately that's the challenge, is the seasonality, right?
Yeah.
And then there's working capital issues, because with Chennapatna you have to get the wood much in advance, you have to season it in heat, right? So overnight, if there's a large order, overnight as in with very short lead time, you can't really cater to it, even with enhanced equipment. So now we're sitting and figuring out, okay, we need to sit with them on a business planning exercise, right? Before we raise any more capital and deploy anything more, let's figure out the business plan. Otherwise, there'll always be this mismatch, between sort of finding a gap rather than, looking at it all holistically, right? So that's one example. And typically that's what happens, they're very nose to the ground, because like I said, it's about business, it's about mouths to feed, it's about, immediate returns, rather than sort of being able to take that big picture view. So hopefully that's something, we can all help. Yeah.
Mayura and Aatish again. At the grassroots level, right, the inequalities that are faced between genders are a little bit more exacerbated. How does that come into play when you are dealing with artisans at that level? So like in Chennapatna, for example, I know that they have female artisans as well as male artisans, but predominantly male artisans will operate the lathe machine. And I don't know how much the female voice actually gets heard there, and how does that kind of play out?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think for the longest time, women were only considered as ancillary workers and not the actual artisans. There are many clusters where, they didn't get an artisan card, for example, because, the person who finishes the product is the artisan, the person who finishes the weaving, and not the person who's helped with all of the other processes. And the crafts have multiple processes, right? But I think this is a battle a lot of people have been, sort of taking up across the country. But one thing that we have seen in pockets that are closer to urban centers like Chennapatna, it's very, very difficult to get your younger generation to want to continue the craft. right? So you're better off focusing on women. And they want to, have a job opportunity that is within their, location, geography, proximity, all of that. So yes, I actually think that women are going to take forward crafts. In most of our clusters, we focus on women. In fact, I remember there was one project that we were trying to do with Barangal Gully Weavers. And, we wanted to set up a producer company. So we spoke to a couple of organizations that have set up producer companies with weavers. They categorically told us, if you don't have more than 60% women weavers, don't touch it. We dropped that project, right? Because we had 10% women weavers. And we knew it was going to collapse because every meeting was political. BJP and, Congress factions and all that nonsense, right? And TRS and all of that, right? Just Telangana. But the point is, women actually, work very well together and all of that. And yes, we are encouraging, wherever possible, skill upgradation, majority women. So even now with Jennifer now, we are doing a skill training program that only focused on women. And because we've now got machinery, women are learning the way.
So, like our vision is like women empowerment in sustainable livelihood. So by saying so, it's not that easy task. Like it's very difficult task because in Maharashtra there is a term for women like Soul and Nool. So that means she has to take care of kitchen and she has to take care of the kids. So first we have to break that ideology. So this is what we did maybe 4 or 5 years back, and that actually helped us in getting women out of the house to the CFC. Once they came to CFC, we made sure that 99% of the machines which are required for few of the raw material processing are used by the women. So if you talk about our jewelry cluster, 100% are women. Then if you talk about say terracotta cluster, we are teaching the pottery, the wheel and all to all the women and girls. So that's the another thing that we give totally different for the terracotta. And talking about say chappal cluster, with chappal cluster only 20% of the job is done by women. So again, from last year, that is December and January, we did a workshop of 30 women, and we made sure that right from leather processing to the final product is made by women. So that's the again ideology or the tradition which is running from 700 or 800 years. We broke that ideology. We were covered by many of the newspapers to that because that was totally different that we did, and maybe in coming 3 or 4 months. That 30 women will be converted to 50 women, and this is how the now tradition is changing. So yes, so this is what we did because first we have to change our mindset. Then only it's possible to change the mindset of that.
And I'll just add to that. So even on Zwende as a platform, let's say we have 600 odd partnerships, 90 to 95% of them are women led, and that's how it's been. Like he's saying, times are sort of changing. A lot of these independent women who are tier 2, tier 3 cities, they are working with artisans. They are either self-taught designers or boutique designers. They're passionate about their skill and craft. They're also passionate about business, and all said and done, I think women have turned out to be way more diligent than men, right? And that's what we have seen. And it's by no selection, but just as an outcome, when we look at the numbers, 90 to 95% are women-owned businesses. Husbands are leaving their jobs in companies like Homelane and Pepperfry and all, and joining their wife in this business that is now doing, anywhere between 5 to 10 lakhs a month. So these are the kind of stories that are generating on platforms, even like Zwende, and it's been very heartening to see. And it's been amazing because they're really, really passionate. They're diligent, and I can't say that for myself for sure. My wife is way better than I am. But yeah.
The context to my question was more at the grassroots level because I'm very, obviously we're all mostly around urban locations and we've seen the story change. And honestly, I think from my mom's generation onwards, it's been a completely different way of life for us.
I think that's what's happening at every level. So if this women-led entrepreneur is starting, she also understands women better. So the people on her team are mostly women. So that sort of keeps happening, and they also tend to be more compassionate and understanding of those workers, and so they are taken better care of. So I think what's happening is across the board, like they are saying, the trend is that more and more women are becoming a part of this. Awesome. So I think I just wrap with that. It's been a great discussion. I think we saw everyone talk about the perspectives of artisans, of the agencies of, let's say, platforms like P2P platforms and other funding opportunities that are available. I think what we are all saying is, and that's why we're all gathered here, is we can all see the opportunity. We are all passionate. We think this is the right thing to do. The question is, how does this matchmaking happen at scale? I think all of us are agreeing that money is there, intent is there, the matchmaking is missing, and maybe the storytelling to some extent is sort of missing. And I think if we can put a little more, mind and put in some money where our mouth is also to some extent, right? Because let's say a P2P platform does exactly that, right? So we can now be part of something small and finance the space. Because the more successes we create, I think we'll be able to see more activity and it will come back and continue to grow. So that's a flywheel I think we can sort of take away from this. And I think whether it's the artisans or the lenders, we all have that sense or that belief that this is a sector that is sustainable. It is a sector that can be profitable. It is a sector that consumers, want and are looking for, and therefore it is investable. And I think if we leave this room today with that positive note and figure out now how we all, more than just being a consumer, what is it that we can do to increase the activity of financing in this sector? I think each one of us has the ability to do, right? Even at a level of climate change, there are conversations where they talk about how individually we can contribute to climate change, right? You will have agencies, you will have everything else going on, but I think from this conversation, I also want to take back the positiveness of the space and the fact that each one of us can do something in this space that is more than just being a consumer. And I think if that one step is taken from this conversation, then our job will become only easier. So with that, I think I'll leave you guys. Thank you again for being here. It was a great time, and thank you to all the panelists.